It's hard to feel happy for someone who wins the lottery. We all want it to be us, but in some cases you can't help but feel glad for the lucky fellow who hits it big, especially if it's someone who has no place to go but the streets. After all, these guys deserve it considering all the troubles they've been through. So grab a box of tissues because we're going to introduce you to 10 homeless people who won the lottery. Number 10. Dennis Mahuran. Fate had been particularly cruel to Dennis Mahuran, who had been part of the homeless community in Michigan for over 25 years now. Living on the streets since 1978, Dennis had seen his fair share of struggles, but all that came to an end when he won $50,000 in the Michigan lottery in 2013. What did he do with the money? Not what you'd expect in your wildest dreams. Instead of getting himself off the streets, Dennis went ahead and bought himself another tent. Apparently, living on the streets for that long, Dennis had found a home. He used the rest of the money to help his other homeless friends. You may disapprove of Dennis's decision, but the man knew what it was like to hit rock bottom. He wouldn't wish that fate on anyone, which is why he went ahead and gave away $100 to over 500 people. Now that's a man with a big heart. Number 9. Emily Reyes. With no place to go and a crippling drug addiction, it wasn't hard to see that Emily Reyes' luck had run out. Things got worse as she found herself sitting in a jail cell with no future prospects. But turns out that's exactly the reality check she needed. When Emily got out of the Amarillo jail, she decided to get her act together and checked herself into a women's homeless shelter, where she began her journey to sobriety. The universe was particularly happy with that one as fate decided to reward her for her efforts when she celebrated 6 months of being clean. Emily brought herself to a Texas two-step lottery ticket, and what do you know? She won $2,000. The money promised a new life for Emily, and she made sure to share it with those who'd be there for her in her darkest moments. Number 9. Emily Leach helps out homeless man. Back in January of 2011, Emily Leach's life turned a new leaf when she won a massive amount of $1 million at the lottery. The money proved to be a gift from God himself as Emily had an outrageous debt in medical bills. Along with clearing her debts, Emily decided to share her good fortune with others. One of these acts of kindness included giving out $100 to a homeless man behind her in the line at the very gas station where she had won her ticket. Except she handed over more than a $100 bill. Emily also ended up giving the lucky man one of her scratch tickets. A grave mistake because the man hit the jackpot and won $260,000 at the lottery. This is one time when being generous didn't work out. Number 7. Crystal Nelson. Crystal Nelson was living far from the ideal life, cramped up with his friend in his RV delivering papers for the Daily Journal in Illinois. But all that won when she won $50,000 in a Powerball ticket in July of 2017. Even with such a huge win, Nelson maintained that her life wouldn't be seeing any changes. She didn't have any impulse purchases lined up or plans to buy an apartment. For a person who hadn't had a place to live in over 5 months, this was awfully uncharacteristic. So where did Nelson spend her money? Well, she may not have had a place of her own, but she did help her brother in Arizona keep his by helping him pay off his house. That's the sort of extraordinary person Crystal Nelson is. She did have some plans about taking a vacation in Kentucky or Arizona. Here's to hoping she got the chance. Number 6. Laszlo Andrashek. Back in 2013, Laszlo Andrashek was any other drunk with an insurmountable amount of debt to his name, crowding the streets. He'd been homeless for 7 years now. In one of his darkest moments, Laszlo stopped at a train station on his way to Budapest and spent the last of his money on a lottery ticket. Much to everyone's shock, Laszlo won 636 million forints, which is equivalent to $2.5 million, making him the richest person on this list. As for what he did with his newfound riches, he spent it clearing the debts to his name and opened up a center for addicts and battered women. Surprisingly, Laszlo's win didn't make the news until 2014 when he made a sizable donation to one of the shelters he and his wife were staying at. Looks like Laszlo wanted to make his fortunes last for as long as possible by keeping a low profile with his spending. Number 5. Steve Borick. Steve Borick is also one of the lucky people who ended up hitting the jackpot. Too bad there was a slight hiccup in his story. Despite winning $25,000, Steve couldn't claim his prize since he didn't have the proper identification documents. He turned to the authorities, but they asked him for his birth certificate or a passport, and once again, Steve didn't have them. Just when everything seemed lost, some folks over at CBC decided to lend a hand. With a few calls, it wasn't long before Steve had the money in his hands. Number 4. Victor Herrera. Victor Herrera might be the toughest of us all. After all, he was battling homelessness in an unforgiving Miami heat. Thankfully, he and his son were able to find a place to stay with Herrera's sister. But there was one issue. His sister's apartment was super cramped, and worst of all, there was no air conditioning. And so one particularly hot night, when Victor couldn't sleep, he walked out to the local store to buy a pack of ice. However, inside he changed his plans and bought a $5 lottery ticket instead. A wise change of decisions because guess what? Victor ended up winning $250,000. That's enough to buy an AC or two. Number 3. Michael Engfors. A 61-year-old Michael from Aspen, Colorado wasn't living through the best of his days. Thanks to a failed business and a divorce, Michael had been on the streets for 6 years now. Even in these damning circumstances, Michael fared on with hope in his eyes. He was a regular lottery player, and even though he had never had more than $1 or $2, he kept at it for over the years. And what do you know? His commitment to the cause paid off as one lucky afternoon he won $500,000 on a $10 ticket. Instead of blowing off the money on booze or food, he used the cash to find his daughter, whom he had not seen for over 20 years. Must have been one heck of a family reunion. Number 2. Grant Freeman. Now, this is what we call an actual stroke of good luck. As an avid gambler, Grant Freeman made his way to the only city that would accept him for who he was, Las Vegas. Sadly, Freeman's dream to win it big in the city of sin didn't take him far. Soon he was homeless and begging tourists for change all so he could spend it on slot machines. One day he decided enough was enough and hitchhiked his way to Nipton, California, 40 miles away. It was here he spent $2 on 2 Mega Million tickets, which, by the way, he paid for in pennies. But it was a lucky day for Freeman because guess what? He ended up winning on both tickets, $8 on one and a whopping $180,000 on the other. Number 1. Eric from Magic of Rahat. Technically, Eric didn't win the lottery. He was only featured on a YouTube account named Magic of Rahat. In the video, Rahat gave Eric a lottery ticket and $1,000 to the clerk. Also, he could make Eric feel what it's like to be the winner for once. The video touched hearts all over the globe. Less by Rahat's act of kindness and more by the fact that Eric offered to share his riches with him. And so the internet banded together to raise over $40,000 for Eric to give him the fresh start he so needed. Alright, which of these stories moved you the most? What would you do if you won the lottery? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Trendjoint, and we'll see you in the next one.